Marcus Jenkins woke up at 5:30 a.m. every morning. His alarm clock made a loud beeping sound that filled his small bedroom. He lived in a tiny apartment on the wrong side of town in Millfield, Georgia. The paint on the walls was old and peeling. The kitchen had a broken window that he covered with cardboard. But it was home, and it was all he could afford on his factory worker salary. Marcus was 28 years old. He had short black hair and kind brown eyes. His hands were rough from years of hard work. He stood 6 feet tall but always walked, with his shoulders slightly bent, like he was trying to make himself smaller. This was something he learned to do growing up in the South. Sometimes it was safer to not stand out too much. He got dressed in his work clothes. Blue jeans, steel toe boots, and a gray t-shirt. The same outfit he wore every day to Henderson Manufacturing. He looked at himself in the cracked bathroom mirror and took a deep breath. Another day at the factory. Another day of keeping his head down and staying out of trouble. Marcus had been working at Henderson Manufacturing for 3 long years. The factory made car parts for big companies up north. It was hot, dirty work. The machines were loud and dangerous. The air always smelled like oil and metal. But the job paid enough for Marcus to send money to his mother and save a little bit for his 8-year-old daughter, Keisha, who lived with his ex-girlfriend in Atlanta. The factory employed about 200 people. Most of them were white men who had lived in Millfield their whole lives. Their fathers had worked at the same factory, their grandfathers too. It was like a family business for many of them. Marcus was one of only 15 black workers in the entire place. He felt like an outsider every single day. When Marcus first got the job, he was excited. Jobs were hard to find in small towns like Millfield. The factory paid better than the gas station or the grocery store. He thought maybe things would be different here. Maybe people would judge him by his work, not by the color of his skin. He was wrong. From his first day, Marcus noticed the stares. White workers would stop talking when he walked by. They would whisper to each other and point in his direction. Some of them were friendly enough during work hours, but they never invited him to lunch or to hang out after work. He ate his sandwiches, alone most days, sitting on a crate behind the loading dock. The worst part was dealing with Danny Reeves. Danny was a big man with a red face and a beer belly. He had worked at the factory for over 20 years. He thought this gave him the right to boss around newer workers, especially black ones. Danny had gray hair and small, mean eyes. His voice was loud and rough from years of smoking cigarettes. Danny drove a pickup truck with Confederate flag bumper, stickers. He had the same flag on his toolbox at work. During lunch breaks, he would tell racist jokes that made some workers laugh and others look uncomfortable. He would use the N-word when he thought no supervisors were around. Management never seemed to hear these comments, or maybe they just chose to ignore them. Marcus tried to stay away from Danny as much as possible. But the factory wasn't that big, and sometimes they had to work in the same area. When this happened, Danny would find ways to make Marcus's job harder. He would accidentally bump into him. He would hide tools that Marcus needed. He would give him wrong information about work orders, then blame Marcus when things went wrong. Other black workers at the factory had their own stories about Danny. James Washington, who worked in packaging, said Danny once told him to go back to Africa when he asked for help with a heavy box. Sarah Thompson, one of only 3 black women at the plant, said Danny would make sexual comments about her when supervisors weren't around. Everyone knew Danny was trouble, but nobody wanted to be the one to complain and risk losing their job. The factory had rules about harassment and discrimination. There were posters on the walls that talked about equal treatment and respect. But these were just words on paper. The real culture of the place was different. The managers were all white men who had grown up in the same town as Danny. Some of them went to church with him. Their kids played on the same baseball teams. Marcus learned to bite his tongue and keep working. He needed this job. His mother was getting older and needed help with her medical bills. His daughter was growing up and would need money for school clothes and supplies. He couldn't afford to make waves or cause trouble. So he put up with Danny's behavior and hoped things would get better. But they didn't get better. If anything, Danny seemed to be getting worse. Maybe he could sense that Marcus was getting tired of taking abuse. Maybe he wanted to push him until he snapped. Danny would find new ways to humiliate Marcus in front of other workers. He would assign him the worst jobs, like cleaning the grease traps or working in the hottest part of the factory during summer. The other workers watched these interactions with different reactions. Some of the younger white guys looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. They needed their jobs too, and they didn't want Danny to turn his attention to them. Some of the older workers actually seemed to enjoy the show. They would chuckle when Danny made his comments or nod their heads in agreement. Marcus often thought about quitting. He would lie in bed at night and imagine walking into the supervisor's office and telling them what he really thought. He would picture himself standing up to Danny and putting him in his place. But then he would think about his mother and his daughter, and he would get up the next morning and go back to work. He tried to focus on the positive things in his life. He was healthy and strong. He had a roof over his head and food on his table. His daughter was doing well in school and made him proud every time they talked on the phone. He had a few friends outside of work who treated him with respect. He went to a small church where the pastor preached about love and forgiveness, but the situation at work was eating away at him. Marcus could feel anger building up inside his chest like pressure in a boiler. He started having headaches and trouble sleeping. He would catch himself grinding his teeth during the day. His friends and family noticed that he seemed more tired and stressed than usual. Marcus didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. The pressure that had been building for 3 years was about to explode. Danny Reeves was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and Marcus was finally going to get the justice he deserved. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shock the entire factory and change both of their lives forever. The next morning would bring events that neither man could have predicted. Tuesday morning started like any other day at Henderson Manufacturing. The Georgia sun was already hot by 7 a.m. when Marcus clocked in for his shift. The factory floor was buzzing with the sound of machines starting up. Workers were drinking coffee from paper cups and talking about the baseball game from the night before. Marcus nodded hello to a few people and headed to his workstation in the warehouse. The temperature outside was already 90 degrees, and it would only get hotter as the day went on. Inside the factory, it felt like an oven. The big industrial fans pushed hot air around, but they didn't make it much cooler. By 9 a.m., Marcus's shirt was already soaked with sweat. He had been loading heavy boxes onto trucks for 2 hours straight. Marcus was used to the heat and the hard work. What bothered him more was the feeling that something was different today. Danny Reeves seemed more aggressive than usual. He kept walking by Marcus's work area and staring at him with a mean look on his face. Danny would whisper something to his friends, and they would all laugh while looking in Marcus's direction. Around 10:30 a.m., Marcus finished loading a truck with car parts that were going to Detroit. His back was sore, and his throat was dry. He needed water badly. There was a water fountain near the break room that all the workers used. It was an old white fountain that had been there since the factory opened in the 1960s. The paint was chipped, and it made a funny noise when you pressed the button, but the water was cold. Marcus walked across the factory floor toward the water fountain. His steel toe boots made loud sounds on the concrete floor. Other workers were taking their morning break. Some were smoking cigarettes outside. Others were sitting at plastic tables eating snacks from the vending machines. The break room smelled like coffee and cigarettes. As Marcus approached the water fountain, he noticed Danny and 2 of his friends standing nearby. They were talking in low voices and looking at him. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. He knew that look. It meant trouble was coming, but he was too thirsty to care. He just wanted to get a drink and get back to work. Danny's 2 friends were Billy Jackson and Pete Morris. Billy was a skinny man with yellow teeth who laughed at everything Danny said. Pete was short and fat with a bald head that was always red from sunburn. Both men had worked at the factory almost as long as Danny. They followed him around like lost dogs, always trying to get his approval. Marcus bent down and pressed the button on the water fountain. The cold water felt good on his dry throat. He could hear Danny and his friends talking behind him, but he tried to ignore them. He drank for about 10 seconds, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. As he started to walk away, he heard Danny say something that made his blood run cold. "That's the last time that boy drinks from our fountain. Danny said loudly enough for Marcus to hear. Billy and Pete started laughing like it was the funniest thing they had ever heard. Marcus stopped walking and turned around to look at them. Danny was staring right at him with a nasty smile on his face. "You got something to say to me?" Marcus asked. His voice was calm, but his hands were shaking with anger. He had put up with Danny's comments and behavior for 3 years, but something about today felt different. Maybe it was the heat. Maybe it was because he was tired of being treated like he didn't belong. Danny stepped closer to Marcus. He was about 6 inches shorter, but he weighed at least 50 pounds more. His face was red and sweaty, and Marcus could smell the coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "I don't have nothing to say to you, boy," Danny said, "but I got something to do about this situation." Marcus didn't know what Danny meant, but he didn't like the sound of it. Other workers had started to notice the tension between them. A small crowd was gathering to watch what would happen next. Some people looked worried. Others seemed excited, like they were watching a fight at a bar. "Just leave me alone, Danny," Marcus said. "I'm trying to do my job and you should do yours." He turned to walk away, but Danny grabbed his arm. "Don't you walk away from me when I'm talking to you," Danny said. His grip was tight and painful. Marcus looked down at Danny's hand on his arm, then looked back up at his face. "Let go of me," Marcus said quietly. There was something dangerous in his voice that made even Danny pause for a second. Marcus was younger and stronger, and Danny knew it. But Danny was also mean and stupid, and he had his friends backing him up. "Or what?" Danny asked, squeezing Marcus's arm harder. "What are you going to do about it?" For a moment, Marcus thought about showing Danny exactly what he would do about it. He thought about grabbing Danny by the throat and throwing him against the wall. He thought about all the anger and frustration that had been building up inside him for 3 years. But then he thought about his job and his family and his future. "I'm not going to do anything," Marcus said, pulling his arm free. "But this isn't over." He walked away, leaving Danny standing there with his mouth open. The crowd of workers slowly broke up and went back to their business. Danny was embarrassed. He had tried to intimidate Marcus in front of everyone, and it hadn't worked the way he wanted. Marcus had stood up to him without backing down or getting violent. This made Danny look weak in front of his friends, and that made him angrier than ever. "Did you see that?" Danny said to Billy and Pete. "That boy thinks he's better than us. He thinks he can just push us around in our own factory." Billy and Pete nodded and made agreeing sounds, but they both looked nervous. They had seen the look in Marcus's eyes, and they didn't want any part of a real fight. Danny spent the next hour walking around the factory and complaining to anyone who would listen. He told people that Marcus had threatened him. He said that black workers were getting too bold and needed to be put in their place. Most people just nodded and walked away, but a few agreed with him. By lunchtime, Danny had worked himself into a rage. He couldn't stop thinking about Marcus and the way he had been disrespected. In Danny's mind, this was about more than just one black worker. It was about the natural order of things. It was about keeping people in their place. That's when Danny got his terrible idea. He remembered the stories his grandfather used to tell about the old days, when things were different, when people knew their place and stayed there. He thought about a way to send Marcus and all the other black workers a clear message about who really ran things at Henderson Manufacturing. Danny walked to his truck during lunch break and got a piece of paper and a black marker from his glove compartment. He also grabbed a roll of duct tape. His hands were shaking with excitement as he wrote 3 words in big, bold letters. Words that would change everything and destroy his life in ways he couldn't imagine. The stage was set for an act of racism so bold and stupid that it would shock everyone who saw it. Danny was about to make the biggest mistake of his life, and Marcus was about to get the chance for justice he had been waiting for. After lunch break, Danny Reeves walked back into the factory with a piece of paper folded in his shirt pocket. His face was red with anger and excitement. Billy Jackson and Pete Morris followed behind him like 2 scared puppies. They could tell Danny was planning something bad, but they were too afraid to ask what it was. The afternoon shift was starting and workers were getting back to their jobs. The factory floor was noisy again with the sound of machines and moving equipment. Marcus was back at his workstation, loading boxes onto a truck that was going to Alabama. He tried to focus on his work and forget about the morning's confrontation with Danny, but Danny wasn't ready to forget. He kept looking across the factory floor at Marcus, his small eyes filled with hate. The piece of paper in his pocket felt heavy, like it was burning a hole through his shirt. He had written something on that paper that would change everything. Something that would put Marcus and all the other black workers in their place once and for all. Around 1:30 p.m., Danny told his supervisor that he needed to use the bathroom. Instead of going to the men's room, he walked toward the break area where the water fountain was located. His heart was beating fast, and his hands were sweaty. He looked around to make sure no supervisors were watching him. The break area was mostly empty. A few workers were sitting at tables, but they were focused on their phones or talking quietly to each other. Nobody was paying attention to Danny as he approached the old white water fountain. This was perfect. He could do what he needed to do without anyone stopping him. Danny pulled the piece of paper from his pocket and unfolded it carefully. Written in big black letters were the words "whites only." He had used a thick marker to make the letters, bold and easy to read. Below those words, he had drawn a crude picture of a stick figure with an X through it. It was childish and ugly, but it got the message across. He also pulled out a roll of gray duct tape from his other pocket. His hands were shaking with excitement as he tore off 4 pieces of tape. This was it. This was how he would show everyone who was really in charge at Henderson Manufacturing. This was how he would put Marcus in his place and make sure all the black workers knew they didn't belong. Danny looked around one more time to make sure nobody was watching. Then he pressed the paper against the wall above the water fountain and secured it with the duct tape. The sign was positioned so that anyone who wanted to use the fountain would have to see it. There was no way to miss it. As soon as the sign was up, Danny stepped back to admire his work. The words "whites only" seemed to glow under the fluorescent lights of the break room. It reminded him of the stories his grandfather used to tell about the good old days, when people knew their place and society was more orderly. Within minutes, other workers started to notice the sign. A young white guy named Tommy Miller was the first to see it. He had just finished his shift and was coming to get a drink of water before heading home. When he saw the sign, his mouth dropped open in shock. "What the hell?" Tommy said out loud. He looked around to see who had put up the sign, but Danny had already walked away and was pretending to work on a machine across the room. Tommy didn't know what to do. He had never seen anything like this at the factory before. Soon, more workers gathered around the water fountain to look at the sign. Some of them were shocked and disgusted. Others seemed amused or even pleased. The reaction was mixed, which showed just how divided the workplace really was. Sarah Thompson, one of the black women who worked in the office, was the next person to see the sign. She had come down to the factory floor to deliver some paperwork to a supervisor. When she saw those 2 words above the water fountain, she felt like someone had punched her in the stomach. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered. Her grandmother had told her stories about the old segregation days, about separate water fountains and bathrooms for black people. She never thought she would see something like this in 2024. Her hands started shaking, and tears came to her eyes. Word about the sign spread through the factory like wildfire. Workers were talking about it in hushed voices. Some were taking pictures with their phones. Others were arguing about whether it was a harmless prank or something more serious. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. James Washington, Marcus's friend from the packaging department, heard about the sign from another worker. He immediately left his workstation and walked to the break room to see it for himself. When he saw those ugly words taped above the water fountain, he felt sick to his stomach. "This is wrong," James said to anyone who would listen. "This is 2024, not 1954. We don't have to put up with this kind of thing anymore." But some of the white workers just shrugged their shoulders or walked away. They didn't want to get involved in what they saw as someone else's problem. Meanwhile, Danny was enjoying all the attention his sign was getting. He could see people gathering around the water fountain and talking excitedly. Some of his white friends were giving him thumbs up or patting him on the back when supervisors weren't looking. He felt proud of himself for making such a bold statement, but Danny had made a terrible mistake. He thought he was living in the same world as his grandfather, where this kind of behavior was acceptable or even encouraged. He didn't understand that times had changed. He didn't realize that his actions would have consequences that would destroy his life. Billy Jackson walked up to Danny and whispered, "Man, are you crazy? You could get fired for this." But Danny just laughed and waved him away. He was feeling too good about his prank to worry about consequences. "Let them try to fire me," Danny said loudly. "I've been here for 20 years. I got rights too, you know. Besides, I'm just telling the truth about how things should be." Several workers heard him say this, and they knew exactly who had put up the sign. About 15 minutes after the sign went up, Marcus heard about it from James. At first, he didn't believe it. He thought James was exaggerating or joking around. But when he saw the serious look on his friend's face, he knew it was real. "Are you serious?" Marcus asked. "Someone really put up a sign that says, 'Whites only,' over the water fountain?" James nodded sadly. "And you think it was Danny who did it?" "I know it was Danny," James replied. "People saw him over there with tape and paper. Plus, he's been bragging about it to his friends. He thinks he's some kind of hero." Marcus felt his world spinning around him. After 3 years of putting up with Danny's comments and behavior, this was the final insult. This wasn't just workplace harassment anymore. This was a direct attack on his dignity and his right to be treated as an equal human being. The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus had to decide what he was going to do about this sign and about Danny Reeves once and for all. Marcus Jenkins stood frozen in place when James told him about the sign. For a moment he couldn't speak. He couldn't breathe. The words, "whites only," kept repeating in his head like a broken record. He felt like he was in a bad dream, but he knew this was real. This was actually happening in 2024 at his workplace where he had tried so hard to fit in and be accepted. "I need to see it," Marcus said quietly. His voice sounded strange, even to himself. James looked worried. He knew his friend was angry, and he was afraid Marcus might do something that would get him in trouble. "Maybe you should just let it go," James said. "You know how things work around here. If you make a big deal about this, they might find a way to blame you instead of Danny." But Marcus was already walking toward the break room. He had to see the sign with his own eyes. The walk across the factory floor felt like it took forever. Other workers stared at Marcus as he passed by. Some looked sorry for him. Others looked away quickly like they were embarrassed. A few seemed to be waiting to see what he would do. The whole factory felt different now, like a storm was coming. When Marcus reached the break room, he saw a small crowd of people standing around the water fountain. They were talking in whispers and pointing at something on the wall. As Marcus got closer, the crowd parted to let him through. Then he saw it. The ugly sign with those 2 horrible words, written in thick black marker. "Whites only." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He stared at the sign for a long time, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and disbelief. This wasn't just about him anymore. This was about every black person who had ever been told they didn't belong somewhere. This was about his daughter, his mother, his ancestors who had fought for the right to be treated as equal human beings. Marcus thought about his grandfather, who had lived through the real segregation era. He remembered the stories about separate water fountains, separate bathrooms, separate everything. His grandfather had told him about the humiliation of being treated as less than human because of the color of his skin. Marcus had hoped those days were over forever, but here was proof that some people still thought that way. Danny Reeves was standing about 20 feet away, pretending to work on a machine but actually watching Marcus's reaction. He had a smug smile on his face like he had just won a prize. When he saw Marcus looking at the sign, Danny's smile got even bigger. He was enjoying every second of Marcus's pain and humiliation. "You got something to say about my sign?" Danny called out loudly. Several workers turned to look at them. The factory floor got quieter as people stopped what they were doing to watch. "Maybe you should find somewhere else to drink if you don't like the rules around here." Marcus looked at Danny for a long moment. He could feel his anger building like pressure in a steam engine. Part of him wanted to walk over and punch Danny in the face. Part of him wanted to grab the sign and throw it in the trash. But then he remembered something his mother had always told him. The best way to fight ignorance is with truth and light. Instead of confronting Danny physically, Marcus pulled out his cell phone. This surprised everyone, including Danny. What was Marcus going to do with his phone? Was he going to call someone? Was he going to record a video? Marcus opened his camera app and took several clear pictures of the sign. He made sure to get the words "whites only" clearly visible in the photos. He also took pictures of the area around the water fountain so people could see exactly where this had happened. His hands were steady, even though his heart was racing. "What are you doing?" Danny demanded. He started walking toward Marcus, looking angry and confused. "You better not be taking pictures of my sign." "Your sign?" Marcus said calmly. "So you're admitting you put this up?" Several workers heard this exchange and started whispering to each other. Danny had just confessed to putting up the racist sign in front of witnesses. Danny realized his mistake, but it was too late. "I didn't say nothing about no sign," he stammered. But everyone had heard what he said. The damage was done. Marcus ignored Danny and opened his Facebook app on his phone. He started typing a message to go with the pictures. His fingers moved quickly across the screen as he wrote about what had happened. He described the hostile work environment at the factory. He talked about Danny's behavior over the past 3 years. He explained how the sign made him and other black workers feel. "This is what racism looks like in 2024, Marcus typed. "This sign was put up over the water fountain at my workplace by a co-worker who thinks it's funny to humiliate black people. This kind of behavior has been going on for years, and management has done nothing to stop it. I'm sharing this because people need to know that discrimination is still alive and well in America." Marcus tagged Henderson Manufacturing in his post. He also tagged the local news stations and civil rights organizations. Then he hit the share button and watched as his post went live on Facebook. Within seconds, the first comments and reactions started coming in. But Marcus wasn't done. He copied the same message and pictures to his Twitter account, his Instagram, and his TikTok. He wanted to make sure as many people as possible would see what had happened. He wanted the world to know about Danny Reeves and his racist sign. Danny watched in horror as Marcus typed on his phone. He didn't fully understand social media, but he knew it was bad news for him. "You can't do that," Danny shouted. "That's private company business. You're going to get in trouble for posting that stuff online." "Let me worry about that," Marcus said without looking up from his phone. He was now writing a detailed email to the corporate headquarters of Henderson Manufacturing. He attached the photos and explained the situation in professional language. He also sent copies to the local newspaper and the NAACP. Other workers were starting to gather around to see what was happening. Some of them were taking out their own phones to record the confrontation between Marcus and Danny. They could sense that something big was about to happen. Within 10 minutes of Marcus posting on social media, his phone started buzzing with notifications. Friends and family members were sharing his post. Strangers were commenting with messages of support and outrage. The story was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Marcus felt a strange sense of calm as he watched the notifications pile up on his phone. For 3 years he had kept quiet about Danny's behavior. He had tried to handle things the right way by keeping his head down and not making waves. But sometimes the right way wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to shine a light on the darkness and let the truth speak for itself. Danny was starting to look worried. He could see that Marcus had done something with his phone, and other workers were acting strange. People were whispering and pointing at him. Some were taking pictures. He had a bad feeling that his harmless prank was about to become a much bigger problem than he had expected. The digital revolution had begun, and there was no stopping it now. Within 20 minutes of Marcus posting the photos online, his phone was buzzing nonstop with notifications. His Facebook post had been shared over 100 times. Comments were pouring in from friends, family, and complete strangers. People were expressing their shock and anger about the racist sign. Some were calling for boycotts of Henderson Manufacturing. Others were demanding that Danny be fired immediately. Marcus watched the numbers climb on his screen. 200 shares, 300, 500. The story was spreading faster than he had ever imagined possible. Local news reporters were already commenting on his post, asking if they could interview him. Civil rights organizations were sharing the story with their followers. The hashtag #WhitesOnly sign was starting to trend on Twitter. Meanwhile, Danny was still standing near his workstation, completely unaware of the digital storm that was building around him. He thought his biggest problem was dealing with Marcus and maybe getting a warning from his supervisor. He had no idea that thousands of people across the country were looking at pictures of his racist sign and calling for his head. At 2:15 p.m., the phone in the main office started ringing. And it didn't stop. Angry customers were calling to complain about the racist incident at the factory. News reporters wanted statements from the company. Civil rights leaders were demanding meetings with management. The receptionist, a sweet older lady named Betty, looked overwhelmed as she tried to handle all the calls. Plant manager Robert Henderson was in his office reviewing production reports when his secretary knocked on the door. She looked pale and worried as she handed him a printed copy of Marcus's Facebook post. "Mr. Henderson," she said quietly, "I think you need to see this." Robert Henderson was a tall man with gray hair and serious blue eyes. He had been running the factory for 15 years and had never dealt with anything like this before. As he read Marcus's post and looked at the photos of the racist sign, his face turned bright red with anger and embarrassment. "When did this happen?" Henderson demanded. His secretary told him it was less than an hour ago. The sign was still hanging above the water fountain in the break room. Henderson stood up so quickly that his chair fell over backwards. "Get security," Henderson ordered. "And call the HR director. Tell them to meet me in the break room right now." He was already walking toward the door, his face set in a hard expression that his employees had learned to fear. Down on the factory floor, word was spreading that something big was happening. Workers were checking their phones and seeing the viral posts about the racist sign. Some were shocked that their workplace was suddenly famous for all the wrong reasons. Others were worried about what this might mean for their jobs and the future of the company. Danny finally started to realize something was wrong when he noticed that people were staring at him and whispering. Billy Jackson walked up to him with a worried look on his face. "Danny," Billy said quietly, "people are saying that somebody posted pictures of your sign on the internet. They're saying it's going viral." "What do you mean viral?" Danny asked. He still didn't understand how social media worked or how quickly information could spread in the digital age. "It's just a stupid sign. What's the big deal?" Before Billy could explain, they heard loud footsteps and angry voices coming across the factory floor. Plant manager Henderson was marching toward the break room with 2 security guards and the HR director following behind him. Henderson's face was redder than anyone had ever seen it, and his jaw was clenched tight with anger. "Where is that sign?" Henderson shouted as he entered the break room. He didn't need anyone to point it out. The racist message was still taped above the water fountain for everyone to see. Henderson stared at it for a moment, then ripped it down with such force that he tore the paper in half. "Who did this?" Henderson demanded, looking around the room, at the workers who had gathered to watch. "I want to know right now who put up this sign." Several people pointed toward Danny, who was still standing by his workstation looking confused and scared. Henderson marched over to Danny with the torn pieces of the sign in his hand. The 2 security guards followed close behind. By now, a crowd of workers had gathered to watch what was happening. Some were recording with their phones, adding even more footage to the growing online story. "Did you put this up?" Henderson asked Danny, holding up the pieces of the racist sign. His voice was so loud that people could hear him all the way across the factory floor. Danny looked around at all the faces staring at him. He could see the anger in Henderson's eyes. He could see the disappointment and disgust on the faces of his co-workers. For the first time, he realized that his prank had serious consequences. "It was just a joke," Danny stammered. "I didn't mean nothing by it. People are too sensitive these days." But Henderson wasn't interested in hearing excuses. "Danny Reeves," Henderson announced loudly, "you are terminated immediately. Security will escort you off the property right now. You are never to set foot on Henderson Manufacturing property again." The factory floor went completely silent. After 20 years of working at the plant, Danny was being fired in front of everyone. He tried to protest, claiming that the company couldn't fire him for a harmless prank. He said he had rights and that he would sue for wrongful termination. "You have the right to collect unemployment," Henderson said coldly. "And we have the right to fire employees who create hostile work environments and damage our company's reputation. Pack your toolbox and get out." Security guards escorted Danny to his workstation to collect his belongings. His Confederate flag sticker looked especially stupid now as he scraped it off his toolbox with shaking hands. Other workers watched, in silence, as the man who had terrorized them for years was finally getting what he deserved. As Danny was being led out of the building, Henderson called for everyone's attention. "Let me be clear," he announced. "Henderson Manufacturing has zero tolerance for discrimination, harassment, or racist behavior of any kind. Anyone who thinks this kind of conduct is acceptable can join Mr. Reeves at the unemployment office." The workers started clapping and cheering. Many of them had been dealing with Danny's toxic behavior for years, and they were relieved to see him finally face consequences. Marcus felt a mix of satisfaction and disbelief as he watched his tormentor being escorted out of the building. Henderson then walked over to Marcus and asked to speak with him privately. Marcus was nervous, wondering if he might be in trouble for posting on social media. But instead of punishment, Henderson offered him an apology and a promotion to shift supervisor, along with a significant pay raise. "We should have dealt with this problem years ago," Henderson admitted. "Thank you for bringing it to our attention even though you shouldn't have had to." Within hours, Henderson Manufacturing issued a public apology on all their social media accounts. They announced new diversity training programs and a stricter anti-harassment policy. The company's quick response helped limit the damage to their reputation, and most customers appreciated their decisive action. Danny's 5 minutes of feeling superior had cost him his job, his reputation, and his future. Meanwhile, Marcus's courage to speak up had earned him respect, a better position, and the satisfaction of knowing that justice had been served. The story became a powerful reminder that in the age of social media, racism and discrimination can no longer hide in the shadows. Sometimes the best way to fight hate is simply to shine a light on it and let the truth speak for itself.